space, a brand new chart. For the head and for the heart, it's your journey, your tools.
Welcome back to The Deep Dive, the place where we turn massive stacks of research into concentrated knowledge. Today, we are really digging into one of the most, well, transformative yet universally challenging concepts in human psychology: setting healthy personal boundaries. If you are someone who constantly feels, overextended, if the very idea of saying no just ties your stomach in knots, or if you regularly find yourself feeling resentful after agreeing to do someone a favor, then this deep dive is definitely for you. Our mission today is to decode the architecture of boundaries, the art, the science of protecting your personal energy without all that debilitating guilt, and ultimately how to transform that chronic overwhelm into, well, genuine intentional living. Okay, first things first, we really need to start by demolishing the core misconception here. When we talk about boundaries, people often picture these like selfish walls, right? Structures built high and thick to keep the world out. Isolation.
Exactly, but our sources are really clear on this. That's the rigid, unhealthy extreme. That's not what we're aiming for. The reality is that healthy boundaries aren't walls at all. They're more like carefully tended fences.
I don't like that.
Yeah, structures for self-preservation. And kind of paradoxically, they actually allow for genuine, authentic, safe relationships to flourish inside them. That fence analogy, it really defines what we call personal sovereignty. These structures, they delineate the invisible but absolutely crucial lines that clarify where your responsibilities, your emotions, your capacity, where they end and where another person's begin.
Okay.
It establishes your sort of non-negotiable right to manage what happens within your own psychological property.
I think the most important nugget, the piece of knowledge we pulled from the source material,
Yeah.
the one that really shifts the mindset, is that distinction between internal governance and external control.
Yes, that is the hinge, the absolute hinge upon which this entire discussion turns. Setting a boundary is fundamentally an act of self-regulation. It's not an attempt to control other people.
Right. So many people fail because they try to make their boundary about changing someone else's behavior, and, well, you just can't. Let's use a common example. Say you have a friend who's habitually late. Drives you crazy, right? Their tardiness feels deeply disrespectful of your time.
Okay, yeah. I think we've all been there.
The unhealthy approach, the controlling one, which, again, is not a boundary, is demanding, you must arrive exactly at 7 p.m. I demand punctuality.
Right, you're setting a rule for them.
Exactly. An external rule you actually have no power to enforce.
So how does the source material suggest shifting that? How do you make it about self-regulation?
The healthy boundary is the internal rule, the one that governs your own response. So the boundary becomes, okay, I value my time, so I will wait 15 minutes past the agreed time. If you arrive after that, and this is the key part, I will have already left. You'll miss the event.
Ah, okay. The action is internal. Precisely. You leave. You are governing your own response. It shifts the locus of control entirely inward to yourself. And that replaces those impossible external demands with empowering internal accountability.
That clarity.
Yeah.
Understanding that your boundary is really about you and your choices. That's what transforms this whole practice, isn't it? It stops being this constant fight against others and becomes more like a quiet declaration of self-respect. And for you, the listener, this is really the path out of feeling perpetually drained, taken for granted.
Yeah. Okay, so to build effective limits, we need to move beyond just the abstract idea and really understand the structure, the system. Psychologically speaking, boundaries are these self-set limits, these rules within relationships. They define what's reasonable, what's safe, and what are permissible ways for other people to behave toward you.
You mentioned earlier they aren't arbitrary. They're built on past experiences, values. How does that connect to them feeling like mental health armor?
Well, the sources often refer to them as an emotional immune system, which I think is a great way to put it.
An immune system.
Okay. Yeah, they're designed to filter external influences, specifically guarding your core self against manipulation or what's often called emotional contagion.
Emotional contagion.
Yeah.
Like catching someone else's mood.
Exactly. If you have really porous boundaries, you just absorb the anger, the stress, the sadness of people around you, almost as if it were your own. Your boundaries are those filtering mechanisms. They let the good stuff in, intimacy, connection, but they keep the toxic influences out. They define your mental health territory.
That makes total sense.
Yeah.
And the research suggests a system is only as strong as its weakest point, right? So a violation in one area, like time, can cascade into burnout.
Absolutely. It's all interconnected, which is why we need to categorize the architecture, understand the different parts.
Okay, let's break it down.
Great. We've identified this multifaceted system. Let's start with the most obvious, the most tangible one. Physical boundaries. This is all about protecting your bodily autonomy, your personal space, your physical belongings.
It's like not wanting a hug sometimes.
Yes. It's the simple act of declining an unwanted hug or, maintaining a comfortable distance when you're talking to someone. Or even setting rules about people entering your private living space without knocking first.
Pretty basic stuff, but fundamental.
It really is foundational because if you don't feel physically safe or autonomous, it's almost impossible to establish mental or emotional safety later on.
Okay, so from the physical, we move inward to emotional and mental boundaries.
Yes. This domain guards your feelings, your energy, and I think the key here, as you said, is separating your emotional state from someone else's.
Right, not taking on their stuff.
Precisely. It means refusing to take responsibility for other people's feelings or their problems. So if your partner is moody, your boundary prevents you from exhausting yourself trying to fix their mood. That's their work, not yours. It also involves limiting exposure to people you know are draining, or recognizing you don't have to share every private thought or sensitive piece of information just because someone asks.
So the boundary is like saying,
It's saying, look, I can listen with empathy, absolutely, but your internal landscape, that's yours to manage.
okay, that sets us up nicely for the resources that get violated constantly in modern life. Time and digital boundaries. They're so linked now, aren't they?
Oh, inextricably, yes. Time boundaries protect your schedule, your priorities, and importantly, your fundamental right to rest. And this is highly concrete stuff, like leaving work at a designated time, scheduling non-negotiable self-care time, even if it's just 15 minutes.
Or saying no to requests that eat into your recovery
Yes,
time.
exactly. And this is now, as you said, buttressed by digital boundaries.
Yeah.
Because the pervasive nature of tech, wow, it's created this endless pipeline for violations.
Tell me about it. The phone never stops.
Right. So this involves managing your online presence, your privacy settings, sure, but primarily it's about setting firm limits on checking work communications outside of work hours. If your job expects a response to a Slack message at 10 p.m., your digital boundary might simply be the silent notification setting on your phone after 6 p.m. You check it when you choose.
That is a battle so many listeners are fighting every single day. Okay, let's cover the remaining three categories: material, sexual, and intellectual.
Okay. Material and financial boundaries. These govern your possessions, your resources. So setting clear limits on lending money or maybe valuable items, defining expectations clearly about splitting shared bills, protecting your workspace from invasion.
This sounds like a big source of family conflict.
It often is, especially when expectations around things like inheritance or financial support are unspoken, just assumed. Clear boundaries help prevent that. Then, sexual boundaries. These protect your comfort, your safety, and obviously consent. This covers everything from clearly communicating what you are comfortable with in intimate situations, all the way to setting limits on sexually suggestive comments or jokes, even in, say, a professional environment.
Crucial. And finally, intellectual boundaries. Protecting thoughts, opinions.
Yes, you're right to have a different opinion. In today's highly polarized world, this boundary is constantly under assault, isn't it?
Definitely. Feels like everyone wants you to agree with them.
It does. So this boundary means maybe refusing to engage in those lengthy, pointless arguments about core beliefs when the other person clearly isn't listening. Or simply stating your right to change your mind without needing permission or approval. It's the refusal to be, bullied into a specific viewpoint.
So if someone gets aggressive arguing politics,
Your intellectual boundary allows you to say something like, look, I'm happy to discuss this calmly, but I won't continue if the tone stays hostile, and then you disengage.
wow. That clarity on the 7 types really shows how comprehensive this self-protection thing is.
Yeah.
But it's not just what boundaries you have, is it? It's the quality, the style. You mentioned the boundary spectrum.
Indeed. It's not binary, like you either have them or you don't. We identify 3 main styles, really, on a spectrum. At one end, you have porous or soft boundaries. This is the person who struggles intensely with saying no. They tend to overshare quickly, maybe absorb others' emotions, that emotional contagion we talked about. Their self-worth is often highly dependent on what other people think of them. They can kind of merge their identity with others, which unfortunately makes them quite vulnerable to manipulation.
And then on the other extreme,
You find rigid boundaries, the impenetrable walls. This person keeps excessive distance, both emotionally and physically. They probably avoid intimacy, are unlikely to ask for help.
And the sources say this often comes from.
Often, yes. It develops as a pretty sophisticated, sometimes essential protective mechanism against significant past trauma or abuse. The walls are high because at one point they were absolutely vital for survival.
But wait, if someone is recovering from trauma, isn't a rigid boundary the safest, most logical choice? How does the source material suggest softening those walls without re-triggering that past pain?
That's a really crucial, nuanced question. Rigid boundaries do offer safety, that's true. But the downside is they prevent genuine connection, and that ultimately leads to isolation, which isn't healthy either.
So what's the goal then?
The goal isn't to suddenly tear down the wall. It's about gradual, cautious flexibility. The sources really emphasize that the softening process has to be self-directed and slow. You might start with really small, low-risk disclosures, or maybe trying to accept help in a non-threatening situation.
Testing the waters, essentially.
Exactly. The individual needs to slowly test the external world and see, okay, asserting a need this time didn't result in that traumatic outcome they experienced before. It builds new evidence.
Which brings us to the middle ground, the ideal. Healthy, flexible boundaries.
Yes, this is what we're aiming for. Think of it like a gate with a discerning gatekeeper. This person is comfortable with intimacy, they know their needs pretty clearly, they can communicate limits calmly, they can say no without being totally crippled by guilt. And crucially, they have the emotional maturity to accept no from others. They don't take it as a personal rejection or, launch into retaliation. Healthy boundaries are adjustable. You can tighten them up when you're stressed or low on resources, and loosen them a bit when you feel more expansive. That flexibility is the ultimate sign of psychological maturity, really.
Okay, understanding the architecture is great. But why is this more than just, self-help advice? Why is it a real psychological imperative? Our sources link the lack of boundaries directly to chronic mental health drain. Let's start with the big one, burnout.
Yeah, burnout. It's often seen as just a consequence of too much work, but fundamentally it's often a consequence of unmanaged emotional labor and overcommitment.
Oh, okay, not just workload.
Right. When you lack limits, you chronically overcommit your finite resources, your time, your energy, your emotional resilience. You're constantly drawing from reserves you haven't replenished.
The sources actually call boundaries the primary preventative strategy for burnout, like treating your energy as this precious, non-renewable asset.
Precisely. If you're consistently, say, leaving work on time or declining new projects when you know you're already at 100% capacity, or maybe refusing to spend your entire lunch hour counseling a colleague on their personal problems.
Right.
You're setting boundaries that ensure your output doesn't vastly exceed your input. Without those limits, that depletion is pretty much inevitable. It leads to physical exhaustion, feeling detached, cynical, all the hallmarks of burnout.
And even before you hit that full burnout wall, there's that slow, steady poison resentment.
Resentment. It's perhaps the most reliable internal alarm system you have. It signals that a boundary is missing or being consistently violated. The sources define it really powerfully as unvoiced anger.
Unvoiced anger, I like that.
Yeah, it's that accumulation of bitterness that builds up when you repeatedly sacrifice your own needs and desires to accommodate others. And it's often paired with that feeling of being taken for granted.
And it often stays hidden, right? Because we think it's nicer or easier to just say yes, even when we're inwardly screaming no.
Absolutely. Every single time you consciously override that internal no, you're essentially making a little deposit of passive aggression or silent bitterness into this internal account. And then, when you eventually snap at a loved one over some tiny, insignificant thing, that's often that resentment account just exploding.
So the antidote isn't just managing the feeling.
No, the only truly effective antidote is setting the boundary. Even though it feels uncomfortable in the short term, it forces that unvoiced anger out into the open, hopefully into clear, honest, respectful communication. It replaces that passive frustration with proactive action.
Okay, let's also talk about anxiety. One revelation from the research was how boundaries directly reduce our cognitive load or anxiety levels.
Yes, a huge chunk of chronic anxiety stems from one main source, trying to manage the uncontrollable. When your boundaries are porous, you instinctively feel responsible for everything, the emotions, the behaviors, the reactions of other people.
Oh God, that sounds utterly exhausting.
It is. You're constantly trying to fix your partner's stress or prevent a family member from being disappointed or reading the room to preemptively manage conflict before it even starts. It's an impossible task.
So how do boundaries help?
Healthy boundaries clarify responsibility. They basically say, okay, I'm responsible for my behavior, my choices, my feelings, and you are responsible for yours.
My emotions are mine, yours are yours.
Exactly. That single distinction, that realization that you can actually step back from the burden of managing all this external chaos, it dramatically reduces your cognitive and emotional load. It creates space for inner calm, for genuine psychological safety.
Okay, finally in this section, let's revisit self-worth. Because if a listener feels unworthy, how can they possibly stand up for themselves? The old idea was always, feel worthy first, then act.
Right. But our deep dive evidence completely flips that script. It's actually a positive feedback loop. You don't wait to feel worthy enough to say no. You act your way into self-esteem.
Act your way in.
Setting a boundary, even a tiny one, is a powerful, tangible declaration. It says, my time is valuable. My feelings are valid. My needs matter. Each time you successfully hold a boundary, it serves as internal proof of your own value, your own agency.
Like building evidence for yourself.
Precisely. It's a direct, consistent countermeasure to that low self-worth that fuels people-pleasing in the first place. By honoring your own limits through action, you cultivate this robust, resilient sense of personal autonomy that's based on what you do, not just on fluctuating feelings. Okay, so before we can start, the architectural work of building new fences, we have to diagnose where the existing ones are weak or maybe completely missing. And the signs of compromised boundaries, they're usually highly visible, actually. They manifest both externally in patterns you can observe and internally like warning lights on your emotional dashboard.
Let's start with those external signs. The patterns that, maybe once we look for them, clearly indicate there's a systemic issue going on.
Well, probably the most obvious red flag is a recurring pattern of difficult or dramatic relationships. We often see chronic codependency dynamics playing out, or relationships characterized by this wildly unequal give and take.
Like one person is always the fixer, the listener, the rescuer.
Exactly. The perpetual fixer, listener, maybe the financial provider, and the other person is the perpetual taker. It's consistently unbalanced.
And that often leads to the second big external sign. That persistent feeling of being used, overlooked, or taken advantage of.
Yes. The individual frequently slips into the victim role in their own narratives. They feel exploited at work, maybe consistently blamed in family arguments, or just feel like their contributions are completely invisible.
Taken for granted.
Totally taken for granted. And especially in today's world, maybe the most quantifiable external sign is chronic overscheduling and overcommitment. Seriously, take a look at your calendar. Is it jammed full of obligations that mostly evoke dread, not enthusiasm?
Oof, that's a tough question.
It is. But if you look at your upcoming weekend schedule and your main feeling is exhaustion before it even starts, well, your time boundaries are likely non-existent.
Okay, so those are external patterns. Now, let's look under the hood.
Yeah.
The internal symptoms, those dashboard warning lights telling you the engine's overheating?
Right. The absolute hallmark symptom here is chronic emotional fatigue, especially after social interactions. And this isn't just, normal physical tiredness. It's that distinct sensation of having your energy just sponged away.
Great.
Completely drained. You feel depleted because you were constantly spending energy managing the atmosphere, editing your words, overextending yourself emotionally just to make sure other people are comfortable.
And then there's that internal warning trio. Persistent guilt, anxiety, and resentment. Always present.
That trio is like the psychological stress test of a boundary. You feel intense, often illogical, guilt just at the thought of saying no. You experience crippling anxiety about how others might react to your limit. You often catastrophize their reaction, imagining the worst. And then you feel that familiar simmering resentment after you inevitably give in and say yes against your better judgment, only to realize, again, that you've sacrificed your own well-being.
And all that internal friction. It leads to difficulty with decision-making and even knowing who you are.
Yes. If your boundaries are consistently porous, your life ends up being constantly dictated by what other people want and need. You lose touch with your own internal compass. You might struggle to even articulate your own desires or opinions because they've been suppressed for so long just to keep the peace.
Which brings us to the driver. People-pleasing, and that deep-seated conflict avoidance.
That's the core mechanism. You actively suppress your genuine needs, your opinions, specifically to maintain external harmony and gain approval. Sometimes you even do it before the other person has made a request. It's like this habit of, well, the sources call it pathological accommodation.
Pathological accommodation.
Wow.
Okay, maybe we can pause here. Encourage you, the listener, to use a quick self-diagnostic checklist based on this. If you're consistently nodding along, these questions might hit home. Do you frequently worry about disappointing people? Do you feel responsible for managing others' moods? Do you feel guilty or selfish when you prioritize your own rest or time?
If the answer is yes to many of those, it's a strong indicator that you have a critical need to start developing stronger limits. You're ready for the next phase.
Okay, so we've diagnosed the problem.
Mhm.
We know the solution involves saying no, honoring our limits, and yet actually doing it can feel terrifying. Why? Why is there such profound internal resistance to putting up these necessary fences?
Well, that resistance is almost always rooted in deep-seated fear, really powerful fear. Often these fears stem from past relational wounds, maybe from childhood, maybe later. Situations where asserting a genuine need actually led to a painful outcome, like rejection or criticism, or even emotional abandonment.
So it's like an old survival mechanism.
Exactly. A survival mechanism that might have been necessary then, but it's outlived its usefulness now. Yet it still controls our choices subconsciously.
Let's break down the key fears driving this resistance. Naming them can help diminish their power, right?
Mm-hmm.
The big one, especially for porous boundaries, is the fear of losing love and abandonment.
Oh, absolutely.
Yep.
This is the conditional love belief deep down. The subconscious thought process goes something like, my acceptance, my belonging, my value. It's all contingent on my compliance, on my usefulness. So if I say no, I prove I'm useless or difficult, and therefore I risk total rejection, total abandonment. Saying no feels like it could literally initiate the end of the relationship. It feels that catastrophic.
And often coupled with that is the fear of others' anger.
Yes. If you experienced anger or disapproval expressed in, say, punitive or explosive ways in your past, then any sign of negative emotion from others now can be perceived as imminent danger, regardless of the current actual context.
So you just try to appease them immediately.
Exactly. The person becomes highly attuned to appeasement. They would genuinely rather suffer the long-term slow burn of resentment than face the immediate acute discomfort of someone else's displeasure, even mild displeasure. They confuse temporary disappointment, which is actually a normal, healthy reaction to a boundary sometimes, with genuine emotional danger.
And often, people pleasers feel driven by the fear of hurting others. They genuinely believe their no will cause lasting damage to the other person.
This is a classic case of over-identifying with the other person's feelings, blurring the lines. They confuse, again, temporary disappointment or frustration or inconvenience with genuine harm. When you set a boundary, the other person has a right to feel whatever they feel, disappointed, maybe frustrated, but that feeling is theirs to manage.
Right. You're not responsible for regulating their emotions.
Precisely. The boundary setter is not responsible for regulating the emotional temperature of the entire room.
Okay, and then there's the big one, the fear of the selfish label. This seems like a powerful deterrent, threatening that core identity many listeners have as being helpful, kind, generous people.
It was huge. The dread of being perceived as mean or unkind or ungrateful. That fear alone is often enough to make a nascent boundary just crumble instantly. Many people with porous boundaries have tied their self-worth so closely to being the nice one, the helpful one, that saying no feels like it threatens their entire self-concept. They give in simply to avoid that harsh, internalized judgment.
So we really need to reiterate, people-pleasing isn't about genuine altruism, is it?
No, absolutely not. It's not a personality trait. It is a highly refined survival strategy. As we mentioned, the sources call it pathological accommodation. It's rooted in this deep belief that your value isn't inherent. It must be constantly earned through extreme agreeableness and self-sacrifice. So setting a boundary feels terrifying because it feels like a direct assault on the only survival mechanism you've ever known.
Okay, before we move to the how-to, let's just clarify the nuance here. We're advocating for building boundaries for safety, right? To foster reciprocal, healthy interactions, not just seeking comfort, like trying to avoid all unpleasantness or difficulty.
That distinction is vital, yes.
Yep.
The goal isn't to create some kind of isolated, sterile environment where you never feel challenged or vulnerable. That's not connection. Healthy boundaries are designed to preserve your energy precisely so you can show up fully for relationships that are sometimes challenging, messy, vulnerable, but are ultimately respectful and reciprocal.
So the aim is healthy interdependence, not total separation.
Exactly. Genuine connection within safe limits. Okay, the good news is setting boundaries is a skill. It's learnable, it's structured. We've refined the research from our sources into a pretty clear, practical 5-step framework you can use. Step 1, self-reflection and awareness. Know your limits. This is the internal work, the foundation. You have to identify the need before you can possibly articulate it.
So how do we do that? How do we know our limits?
Start treating those feelings, resentment, tension, frustration, not as negative emotions to suppress, but as data points, important signals. When that tension arises, pause. Ask yourself, okay, what limit of mine was just pushed? What boundary was crossed? What do I actually need right now in this situation?
This step also seems to require an honest inventory of our resources. We can't just keep giving indefinitely.
Precisely. You need to get real about your limits on time, on emotional energy, even on your focus. These are finite resources. Journaling can be really helpful here. To identify your non-negotiable values and needs. For example, if peace and quiet is a core need for you to function, then you must block out time for quiet. You have to build a boundary around it.
Okay, so once we have that insight from step 1, we move to step 2. Define and formulate. Be clear and specific, turning the feeling into an actual rule.
Yes. Specificity creates clarity, both for you and, crucially, for the other person. So instead of the vague thought, ugh, I wish my coworker would stop interrupting me all the time, the defined boundary rule might be, okay, if I'm interrupted more than once while speaking in a meeting, I will pause, maybe hold up my hand gently and say, please let me finish my thought.
Very concrete.
Yes. And a key principle here, especially when you're starting out. It's generally better to start with tighter boundaries when establishing a new limit.
Why tighter?
Because it is always easier to intentionally loosen a tight boundary later on once it's established than it is to try and tighten up a porous one that people have already gotten used to crossing without consequence. Think about starting a new job, set those work hour limits clearly from day one.
Makes sense. Okay, step 3 is communication. Direct, calm, respectful. This feels like the scariest part for many. How do we make sure the message lands without causing a huge fight?
The language you use matters profoundly. First, stick to I statements. Frame the boundary in terms of your feelings and your needs, which are indisputable facts about your experience rather than accusing their behavior.
So I feel X when Y happens.
Exactly. I feel overwhelmed when I receive texts about work after 7 p.m. That's a boundary statement. You always bother me late at night. That's an accusation, and it just invites conflict and defensiveness. Second, be direct and simple. Resist that strong compulsion many of us feel to over-explain, justify, or apologize profusely.
Why avoid justifying? Doesn't it help them understand?
It actually undermines the firmness of the boundary. It signals you're unsure, that maybe it's negotiable. Remember, no thank you is a complete sentence. You don't always owe a lengthy explanation. And crucially, deliver the message when you are calm. Never try to set a boundary in the heat of conflict or when you're feeling really emotionally volatile. Wait until things have cooled down.
Okay, for the listener who's just starting out feeling really nervous about this, we recommend step 4. Start small and build confidence, strengthening the boundary muscle, as we call it.
Yes. The psychological principle here is that success breeds success. Don't make your first attempt confronting, your most difficult boundary-violating family member. That's like trying to lift the heaviest weight first.
Start lighter.
Exactly. Start with low-stakes practice. Politely decline a persistent salesperson's offer. Ask a friend if you can call them back in an hour because you're in the middle of something. State a simple preference clearly like, actually, I'd prefer to watch a comedy tonight, instead of just going along with whatever. Each small success gives you positive reinforcement. It literally retrains your brain to associate assertiveness with agency and self-respect, not with fear and rejection.
Okay. And finally, the step needed for long-term success. Step 5. Prepare for and manage reactions. Reinforce and stay firm.
You absolutely must anticipate some pushback, especially from people who have become accustomed to your lack of limits. They will often test the new fence, sometimes consciously, sometimes not. Here's the core mindset you need to hold on to. You are responsible for respectfully communicating the boundary. That's your job. You are not responsible for the other person's emotional reaction to it.
Even if they get upset, angry, try to guilt trip you.
Their disappointment, their anger, their guilt-tripping attempts. Those feelings are theirs to manage, not yours. Your responsibility ends with clear, calm communication of your limit.
And if they test it, if they ignore your out-of-office auto-reply or ask the same favor again 2 days later, pretending they forgot.
You must calmly and politely restate the boundary. Consistency is the teacher here. If they push you, simply respond. Maybe something like, I understand you're disappointed, but as I said, my schedule won't allow for that. Or, my answer on that hasn't changed. Would you? Inconsistency teaches them that your limit is negotiable, that if they just push hard enough, you'll cave. Consistency teaches them that your word is law when it comes to your boundaries.
Okay, that fear of saying no often really boils down to just not knowing the exact right words to use in the moment.
Yeah.
So let's arm the listener with some practical language tools, some scripts they can adapt and use right away. Let's start with general principles for delivery ways to soften the blow without actually compromising the limit itself.
Okay. One of the most effective general techniques is often called the no sandwich. It's basically an assertiveness technique designed to deliver the refusal clearly, but also acknowledge the relationship, which can make it easier for both people to process.
Okay, a sandwich. How does that work? What are the layers?
The structure is simple. You start with a positive statement, maybe appreciation, maybe connection, that's the top slice of bread. Then you insert the clear, unambiguous no, that's the filling. And you end with another positive statement, maybe goodwill, maybe looking forward to future connection, that's the bottom slice.
Can you give an example?
Sure, let's say someone asks you to take on a big volunteer role you don't have time for. You could say, wow, I really appreciate you thinking of me for this leadership role. That means a lot.
Yeah.
Positive start. Unfortunately, I've looked at my commitments and I've reached my current capacity. I won't be able to take on any new responsibilities this quarter, clear no. I truly hope the project goes incredibly well, though. Positive closing.
Nice. It's clear, but still warm.
Exactly. Another principle is you can offer an alternative, but, and this is crucial, only if you genuinely want to and it's feasible for you. Don't offer an alternative just to soften the no if it still overextends you. So maybe you say, I can't lend you the full $500 you asked for, clear no, but I would be happy to help you brainstorm some ways to cut expenses or look for side work alternative offer. You've affirmed the person while still holding the material boundary.
Okay. And for the habitual people pleaser, that reflex to say yes immediately, you recommend practicing the skill of buying time.
Absolutely essential. This breaks that immediate panicked yes reflex. When someone asks you for something, especially something significant, train yourself to use a delaying phrase. Something like, let me check my calendar and think about my energy levels for that week. Can I get back to you by the end of the day?
Right. Gives you space.
Exactly. That pause allows for intentional decision-making. It takes the pressure off the immediate moment and lets you respond thoughtfully, not reactively.
Okay, now let's tackle scripts for specific, often high-stakes environments. First up, the workplace scripts. Here, the refusal needs to sound professional, often framed around things like performance quality or competing priorities.
Right. So if a colleague tries to dump a task on you that isn't really yours, thanks for thinking of me, but I need to prioritize my current deadlines for Project X to ensure I deliver high-quality work on time, so I won't be able to take on that additional task right now. I hope you can find someone else to assist.
See how the refusal is framed around maintaining quality and meeting existing commitments. Very professional.
Exactly. Now, what if it's your boss who's overloading you? This is trickier, but the key is the prioritization script. You shift the responsibility for resource allocation back to them.
How's that sound?
You need to use objective facts. Okay, thank you for assigning this new project. I want to be fully transparent about my current workload. Right now, my capacity is fully dedicated to delivering Project A and Project B, which, as you know, are both due this week.
You're laying out the facts.
Yes. Then you add, if I take on this new task immediately, the quality or the timeline of one of the existing priority projects will likely be negatively affected. Can you help me prioritize which deliverable is most critical for the team business right now?
Brilliant. You're not saying no to the work itself. You're asking them to manage the resources they control, acknowledging that something has to give.
Precisely. And related to this, protecting digital time is vital. Use those automated email replies. Something simple like, thank you for your message. I'm currently out of the office. My working hours are 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. I will respond to messages received outside of these hours on the next business day.
Sets the expectation clearly, so you don't have to keep manually enforcing it.
Exactly. Okay, moving to family and friends scripts. This is often the most emotionally charged arena, right? So here, warmth is usually essential, but it must be paired with undeniable firmness.
So, declining a social invitation from a friend you genuinely like, but you're just exhausted.
Be honest, but kind. Thanks so much for the invite. That sounds fun, but I have to pass this time. I'm feeling incredibly overextended lately and really need a quiet weekend just to completely recharge my batteries. I'd love to catch up next week, though.
So you're clear about the limit. No this time.
Yeah.
And the reason. Self-care, without needing to make up some elaborate excuse. And you affirm the connection. Love to catch up.
Exactly. Now, setting a conversational boundary, say with a persistently critical or prying family member, Mom, Dad, Aunt Sue, I love you and I really value our relationship, but I'm not comfortable discussing my career choices, personal finances, love life right now. Could we please shift the conversation to something else, like suggest alternative topic?
And if they push back, look, so, oh, come on, I'm just curious.
You calmly, kindly repeat the boundary. As I said, I appreciate your interest, but I'm choosing not to discuss that topic today. Repeat as necessary, like a gentle broken record.
Okay. Finally, we have to be ready for high pressure or persistent requests. When a simple refusal is just ignored or argued with, the firmness needs to escalate.
Yes. When you feel the other person trying to negotiate or guilt you after you've already given your clear no, you need language to shut down the negotiation itself. An escalation script might be, I understand you feel differently, but I have given this careful thought and my decision on this is final. That phrasing, decision is final, clearly asserts that the discussion negotiation period is over.
And if they still refuse to respect the boundary, if they keep pushing,
Then you have to introduce a consequence, linking back to step 5. Reinforce and stay firm. You state the boundary and the consequence of violating it. The ultimate tool for reinforcement sounds something like this. My answer is no. I realize this disappoints you, but I need to honor my limit here. If you continue to push this topic, ask me again, pressure me about this, I will need to end this phone call, leave the room, change the subject.
and the absolute key is,
You must be prepared to follow through on that consequence immediately. That's what proves to the other person, but more importantly to yourself, that your boundary is real, solid, and non-negotiable. Okay, so you've done it, you've gathered your courage, you've set the boundary, but then, almost inevitably, comes the internal backlash. Guilt. Big, overwhelming guilt sometimes. This guilt is the primary force that tests your resolve. It's the feeling that tries to lure you right back into those old people-pleasing patterns. So successfully sustaining boundaries over time requires having a really robust internal toolkit to manage this reaction when it comes up.
and we fight those guilt-inducing thoughts first with logic, right? Using cognitive reframing. That structured catch it, check it, change it technique you mentioned to systematically challenge those automatic negative thoughts, ANTs.
Exactly. The first step, catch the thought, requires mindfulness. You have to become aware of the specific thought that's actually causing the distress, like literally catch it in action. Is it, I'm a terrible friend, or I've damaged this relationship forever, or they must think I'm so selfish?
Okay, so you isolate the thought.
Then check the thought. You put it on trial, essentially. Question its validity. Ask yourself, is this thought 100% true? Without a doubt, what's the actual objective evidence for and against it? How would I advise a dear friend if they were having this exact same thought about themselves? Would I be this harsh on them?
Let's run through a common one. Say the thought is that cognitive distortion called catastrophizing. Okay, I said no to helping my neighbor move that heavy couch, and now they'll probably hate me forever and tell everyone on the street I'm a selfish jerk.
Right. So the check step involves asking, how likely is that really? If the relationship with the neighbor is generally okay, is it likely to be completely ruined by one single respectfully communicated refusal? Probably not. What's a more realistic outcome? Maybe they're momentarily inconvenienced, they find someone else, life goes on. Then the final step is to change the thought. You replace the distorted, catastrophic thought with a more balanced, realistic, and compassionate alternative. Like, okay, a strong and healthy neighborly relationship is resilient enough to handle a respectfully communicated boundary. While they might feel disappointed or inconvenienced for a moment, I preserved my back health energy prior commitment, which was necessary. They will likely understand or find another solution.
What about that other common distortion, labeling, which directly attacks self-worth? The thought might be, I prioritize my need for rest over going to that party, therefore I am selfish. Full stop.
Yeah, that's a tough one. The check step here reveals that one single action does not define your entire character. You are not your behavior in one instance. So the compassionate reframe is absolutely essential. Prioritizing my own well-being, like getting needed rest, is an act of self-respect and self-preservation, not inherent selfishness. I am recognizing and honoring my own valid needs, demonstrating that my needs are just as important as the needs or desires of the person who invited me.
It's vital to replace that harsh judgment with objective self-care language.
Absolutely. But cognitive reframing addresses the intellectual thought patterns. Sometimes, even when you know the thought isn't true, the uncomfortable feeling, the guilt, the anxiety still lingers in your body. So we need something to soothe that emotional discomfort directly.
And that's where self-compassion comes in, as the emotional antidote.
Yes. Self-compassion is simply treating yourself with the same kindness, care, and understanding that you would naturally offer to a dear friend who is struggling with the exact same situation. It's not self-pity or making excuses. It's genuine self-kindness. And there's a brief, highly practical tool we recommend called the self-compassion break. It integrates mindfulness, common humanity, and kindness in 3 quick steps you can do anywhere.
Okay, what are the steps? Step 1, mindfulness. Just acknowledge the feeling without judgment. You notice the physical sensation of guilt or anxiety in your body, and you say to yourself internally, okay, this is a moment of suffering. This guilt feels really painful right now. You just name it. Acknowledge its presence.
Step 2, common humanity. Remind yourself that this struggle, this discomfort, is part of the shared universal human experience. You're absolutely not alone in feeling this way. Say something to yourself like, setting boundaries is difficult for almost everyone. Other people feel this exact same guilt when they prioritize themselves. This is part of being human. This immediately counters that feeling of isolation that fear and guilt often produce.
Okay, and step 3.
Step 3, self-kindness. Offer yourself comfort and validation directly. Ask yourself, what do I need to hear right now? And then offer yourself words of kindness. Maybe. May I be kind to myself in this moment? I did the right thing for my health well-being, even though it feels hard. I accept the temporary discomfort that comes with honoring my needs.
And the sources also recommend integrating supportive touch.
Yes, this is surprisingly powerful. When that wave of guilt hits, physically placing a hand over your heart or gently holding your arm or even giving yourself a brief hug, these simple gestures can send calming signals directly to your body's nervous system, reducing the stress response. And finally, it's helpful to recognize the power of protective self-compassion, sometimes called fierce self-compassion. This involves cultivating the energy that allows you to stand up for yourself, to say no firmly, to protect yourself from harm or disrespect. It associates compassion not just with softness and yielding, but also with strength, courage, and righteous anger when necessary. That's the exact energy needed to maintain a boundary against persistent external pressure.
Wow. Okay, so this journey from operating with those porous, draining boundaries to consciously establishing intentional, flexible limits. It really is transformative, isn't it? It sounds like a process that moves you from reactive exhaustion to, well, proactive self-care and genuine autonomy.
It absolutely is. And the transformative ripple effect is profound. What begins as this really difficult, conscious, sometimes awkward, effortful act, setting that first boundary, it gradually becomes more habitual, more natural over time. That constant low-grade pressure, you used to feel the pressure to appease others, to manage their feelings, to anticipate their needs, it starts to diminish. And it gets replaced by this deep, quiet sense of security and self-respect that really permeates every single area of your life.
And the ultimate reward, maybe, is that your relationships are reimagined.
Yes. They fundamentally shift. They move away from being defined by obligation, hidden guilt, and that slow-building resentment we talked about. And they start being built on a foundation of mutual respect, earned trust, and radical honesty. Because when you're clear and honest about what you can and cannot offer, what you will and won't accept, you create the space for genuine, authentic connection.
Connection with people who respect you, the real you, not just people who benefit from your lack of boundaries.
Exactly. Living a boundaried life really means aligning your daily actions with your deepest core values. It is probably the single most effective way we know to reduce chronic stress, protect your mental and emotional health, and ensure that your precious, limited resources, your time, your energy, your focus are allocated intentionally, allocated toward the things, the activities, and the people that truly matter to you.
So we'll leave you, our listeners, with this final, maybe provocative thought to mull over as you go about your week. Living a boundaried life isn't about erecting walls to spite the world or isolate yourself. It's actually about cultivating a sacred internal space, a space where your own needs, values, and well-being are honored. And by consistently honoring your own needs, and by modeling these healthy limits in your interactions, you don't just protect yourself and your energy, you also provide a clear, honest blueprint for sustainable relationships. Ultimately, you teach others how to engage with you in a way that is respectful, reciprocal, and enduring. You create connections built on integrity, not just obligation. And that really is the foundation for authentic connection.
It's the strength to build anew. It's the light to guide you through. It's the choice to find your way. Starting here, starting today.
And that wraps up our discussion on boundaries. My hope is that you now see them not as barriers that push people away, but as the necessary guidelines that let safe, respectful love in. Join me next week for our 4th episode, A Guide to Fair Fighting, Healthy Conflict Resolution. Conflict is inevitable in any relationship, but it doesn't have to be destructive. We'll cover the rules of engagement to ensure that when you argue, you're fighting for the relationship, not against each other. If you're finding this new season valuable, please hit that subscribe button so you don't miss an episode. And if you'd like to support the show, all the information for our donation link is in the show notes. As always, you can find all resources at yourjourneyyourtools.com and the app at yourjourneyyourtools.app. Thanks again for listening, and I'll catch you on your journey.
Let's begin. Let's begin.